So, okay. Kirsty, can you go to the next slide, please?
Yep.
One before that. So hi everybody, and welcome to this event on student housing cooperatives. I'm Tessa and I'm from the Kent Community Housing Hub, along with my colleague Kirsty, who's somewhere and doing the slides. I'm going to explain the work that we do later, but basically we support groups and communities who want to develop the type of housing they need and raise awareness and knowledge of community-led housing across the county. Like much of the UK, Kent has very high house prices. In some areas, private rents are reaching 50% of average annual earnings, and that's in comparison to 30% of income spent on all housing costs, which is considered affordable. Too many people are living in expensive and insecure housing. The housing that is being built is very often not what's actually wanted or needed by people living in the local area who can't afford the open market, and affordable housing has become unaffordable to many. So one way to challenge and address that is for people to come together and develop a housing cooperative, which can be shared housing or individual homes. This event obviously is specifically on student housing co-ops, which is shared housing and offering an alternative to expensive and sometimes poor quality private renting and student halls, over which there's very little control. Kent has a very large student population, especially in Canterbury, but also elsewhere. And as far as I'm aware, there's no student housing co-ops in Kent. So I'm very pleased to introduce you to SeaSalt Housing Cooperative. They're based in Brighton and they're doing just that. And they're going to lead this event today. So I'll hand over to Ruthie and Sim, who are founding members of SeaSalt.
Thank you, Tessa. Yeah, so I'm Ruthie. I co-founded, well, one of the co-founding members of SeaSalt Housing Cooperative. We'll be talking later on in the event about what SeaSalt is. But yes, so I have been involved with housing co-ops for nearly 3 years now. I joined in my first year of university, having never heard of what a housing co-op was. And I've been working with Sim over the last 3 years and a lot of other people, students interested in this. And I am taking a step back soon as I'm no longer a student. I graduated from Sussex with a degree in international development, and now I'm working as a campaigns coordinator. So that's a bit about me, but you'll hear more about SeaSalt later. Sim?
Hiya. Thank you, Ruthie, and thanks Tessa and Kirsty for inviting us to do this awesome talk in Kent. I've never been to Kent. I would love to. My name is Sim. I also helped set up SeaSalt 3 years ago. That came up on my Facebook notifications. It's weird. I was in my final year when I joined SeaSalt, doing a degree in neuroscience, and as I got more interested in housing and economics, I decided to switch over and do a master's in sustainable development. So I graduated last year, beginning of last year, and since then I've been working in housing and in co-ops, and I now live in a housing co-op, but it's not a student housing co-op. I should clarify. So yeah, I co-founder of SeaSalt, and I'm here to talk to you today about student housing co-ops, I guess. Just some housekeeping. You're welcome to put your video on, but this event is being recorded, so feel free to keep it off or on whatever you prefer, and rename yourselves if you like. That works. There will be a chance to ask questions towards the end, but if you want to, just type questions in the chat and me or Ruthie will try and get to it. And yeah, that's it. If you haven't already introduced yourself in the chat, I encourage you to do that. It's really nice to hear read what all of you up to. We can't engage with you nearly as much as we'd like to, but as much as we can, that would be nice. Shall we get started?
Yes. And just to add that if you do ever have a tech problem, Kirsty is on hand. named as Kent Community Housing Hub, or again, just put a message in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and chat as well, that's fine. So, Kirsty, please, we have the next slide. Okay, so just a really quick run through of what we're going to be covering today. So the aim is to talk about student housing co-ops, and we're assuming no previous knowledge of what a housing co-op is or kind of the community housing ideals. So yeah, don't ever feel like you need to already know something, and if something doesn't make sense, please do stop us and ask. We've got some videos, a few kind of polls and a word cloud, and this is roughly what we'll be talking about. So what is a co-op, what is a housing co-op, specifically student housing co-ops, and a bit about the housing market. We'll then have a 5 to 10 minute break and come back after the break to hear more about student housing co-ops, specifically the story of SeaSalt, and you'll hear from Tessa and Kirsty again about what Kent Community Housing Hub can offer you. And then we'll have some time at the end, as Sim said, for questions, where hopefully we can kind of all unmute ourselves and chat a bit more. Just one last thing, we'll be sharing a few links throughout, so hopefully that will be useful if you want to go away and read up on things that we've referenced, but I'll be sending them all in an email afterwards through the Eventbrite email sign up list, so don't feel like you have to frantically save links. Yeah. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to start off just by thinking about student housing, and I'm going to put a poll in the chat to look first about what people already know about housing co-op and what they'd like to get from the event, more for our information. And whilst you're doing that, Sim, would you like to say the other activity?
Yeah, if you would so like to, and I guess this is more aimed towards students, but honestly, if you've been a student in the past, go for it. I just want you to think about like what the first word is that comes to your mind when you think about student housing. Especially this has been the case if you have spent the last year in lockdown. I know that Kent students have done that a lot, so spent a lot of time at home. What comes to mind when you think of housing? And yeah, we'll give you like a minute or two to go through that.
So yeah, hopefully that link will take you to just 2 questions, so that we kind of know where to how to gauge what we're talking about. And in the chat, yeah, fire away with words that come to mind when you think of student housing. Positive, negative, somewhere in between, doesn't matter. Small, yeah. Expensive. Small and expensive, I think, is a common combination. Again, small, expensive, and poor quality are not mutually exclusive words. Overpriced.
Friendly, I like it. We've got a positive one.
Things great, yeah. At Sussex, I don't know if it's the same at Brighton, but people would say about the university halls that the ones that were the worst quality were the friendliest, because people sort of bonded over the fact that it was really poor quality. It's just a fun experience of halls. Great, well, we've got quite a few people who have done the poll. So Kirsty, would you mind if I shared those results? I mean, it's more so for us to kind of think about how we present this, but as you can see, we've got quite a nice mix there. A few people who know nothing and not a lot about housing co-ops, which is what we kind of expected, so that's great, and a few who know quite a lot or a lot, so thank you for answering those. And what do you hope to get from the event? Learn about housing co-ops in general. Well, we hope that you feel you do by the end of it, and specific examples. Great, thanks everyone for that. That's really helpful, and hopefully, yeah, we can cover those points. So if we could have the slides again, Kirsty, we've got 3 quick questions that Sim's going to put to have a think about housing.
Thank you. Cool, this is it. Okay. So I've got 2 questions for everyone, and this is got the answer to this, but I just want you to pop in the chat what types of accommodation most students live in. Now I'm thinking about, like, is it do students own their own house? Do they rent? Do they live on campus at university accommodation? Basically, where do you think 50 plus students live? And yeah, what kind of tenancy is it? Halls of residence, private landlords, HMOs. So HMO means house of multiple occupancy, which is a specific kind of private rented. PRS stands for private rented sector. Probably HMOs, private landlords renting. Yeah, absolutely. At home with parents is another one. Yeah, definitely some students who live with family still. U1 on campus or student village halls, yes. U2 or 3 generally private landlords off campus. 3 to 10 students per house. Yeah. That's been my experience. Private landlords, shared houses, absolutely. Shared housing, houses of multiple occupancy from private landlords, shared houses, private rental sector, HMO. Yeah, we're getting a lot of the same ones coming up. Thank you so much. That is very, very accurate. You guys are pretty spot on. Do you want to go to the next slide? Got a pretty chart to show you. So this is a national statistic, but 44% of students live with private landlords, which matches up to the year 2 and 3 students rent, whereas year 1 students typically go to university halls. Second one is university accommodation at 27%, and that kind of makes up the bulk of it. There are a bunch of other smaller ones, and I'm pretty sure this is also the case in Kenton and Canterbury. There's quite a lot of student private halls, and the difference is that they're not managed by the university. I suppose some with parents, and then a small minority have their own property, and 2%. The other is where student housing co-ops come in. It is basically its own kind of form of tenure. Okay, got one more question for you, and then you can just listen to us talk for a little bit. Scott, in your day, is this just full-time students? That is a really good question. This statistic was taken from the ONS, who looked at term time accommodation. I don't know whether it was full-time students or part-time, or if part-time students were included. That is a good question. Sorry, I don't know the answer.
We can send a link from where we got this graph from, and it might specify there.
Yeah. How can we join or find the shared housing? That's a very big question, and that is the one that we're here to find out. If you want to start your own, if you want to set up your own shared housing, then we can talk you through the process for this. Finding shared housing, I could tell you about Brighton I could tell you that there are Facebook groups that a lot of people go on to. There are university forums, websites, university housing, teams, departments. Who would, is that kind of answering your question? Let me know. Do you want to go to the next slide, please? Okay, how much do students pay in rent? And so you our answers for joining the co-op. We'll link you some ways to provide your contact details at the end of the session. And so if you're interested, then you can oh my god, yeah, you're really keen. I love it. You can come to some more meetings and start talking about joining. I'm going to switch my brain and ask people to put in the chat how much do students pay in rent, and you can go per week or per month. I kind of know the I kind of know the calculation, but I think there's also a calculator. Ruthie, if you can drop it into the chat, if you're not sure about per week or per month. Universities do still have accommodation officers, although when I was looking at Kent University, they used to have a team and they shut down over lockdown because students stopped needed houses. Of course, that's how that went. No, I'm not sure why they closed, but generally it is the case that universities have accommodation officers. I'm in Brighton looking to start a non-student co-op, so very interested in any resources you may be able to share. Absolutely, very happy to share. I will drop my email address in the chat at the end of the session, so any questions, please do get in touch. I love sharing the knowledge about housing co-ops, and if you're in Brighton, I probably know a bit more.
So we've got a few guesses for rent per month and per week if you want to work it out. I'm posting a calculator here, but yeah, we've got quite a range coming through.
More than they get in grants, that is correct. There aren't any grants anymore. Well, maintenance grants anyway. 100 quid a week, 400 to 600 per month. Private halls, £1,000 a month. £1,000 a month.
Private halls definitely, yeah, definitely range in price.
Yeah, they're going to be at the top. My accommodation in the northeast in 2008 was between 400 and 650 per month. Interesting. Okay. That's wow, a decade ago. I would add that's Leeds. Okay, that's Leeds. Oh, in for £1,000 a month. Yeah.
If any current students in Kent, not to put you on the spot, don't feel obliged, but if you would want to put in roughly what you know is the price in Kent of accommodation, whether that's private rented houses or private halls or university managed halls, that would be quite interesting for me and Sim to know, because we're more familiar with kind of the Brighton market, and it does seem to vary a fair bit depending on location, but there's definitely themes of student housing being not cheap.
I love the way you phrase that. All right, give it like another couple of seconds, and then private rental in Kent, £550 without bills for a 1-bedroom flat that's an hour from the university. Interesting.
5,000 a year, yeah.
I need to do the maths in my head. How much is that a month? Depends.
The uni halls sometimes have shorter tenancies because it's minus holidays. Yeah. So
uni hall, £1,000 a month for the academic year only. Yeah. 400 a month, not including bill. That's a steal with other houses. Generally more expensive. 430 to 600. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
7.5 grand a year. My gosh. Okay. We're going to show you the answers that we have. Don't let's tell you that we're right and you're wrong, because this is just the information we can find. With a pretty graph. Kirsty, would you be able to? Yeah. Okay, so in yellow, we've got £126, which is the average rent UK wide, and that is per week. And then in the southeast, we've got an even higher £150 per week. And then in blue, we've got the SeaSalt rent. Per week, 105. This tends to be the case in other student housing co-ops too. Ones in Birmingham, Edinburgh, Sheffield. They're generally some of the cheapest rent around. There's a lot of other benefits to student housing co-ops, but this is definitely one of them. Okay. Should we move on?
Yeah, it looks like Kent is sort of, the average ones aren't far off what you're experiencing in Kent as well. So, yeah.
Cool.
Kirsty, next slide, please. So now we're going to look at what is a co-op first, as like a base understanding, and then move on to what is a housing co-op. So could we have the next slide again, please? Sim, you're on mute.
Thank you. Still. Okay. Yes. What is a cooperative? So a co-op is, by itself, it's just a legal entity. It's a form of organisation that you can set up. Something that most co-ops, almost all co-ops have in common is that they are not for profit, which means that any surpluses that they make from their activities, whether that's rental income from a house or like business income from a shop, or whether it's no other examples are coming to mind anymore. Whether it's one of those, the surplus income goes back into the organisation towards wages, towards materials. It could be anything, but that is generally the basis around which co-ops were set up 200 years ago and still run. So got definition here. Cooperative is a business or an organisation that is owned and controlled by its members to meet their shared needs. The members can be its customers, its employees, residents, or suppliers, who have a say in how the co-op is run. So the key thing here is that it's owned and controlled by its members. Yeah, we've got in the bottom left corner, 7 cooperative principles, and these were basically come up with 200 years ago with the Rochdale pioneers, who set up a shop to get wholesale foods of good quality, and they've been edited a little bit over the years, but it's mostly all of the same things, and yeah, I won't go into all of them, but the one that I really like is cooperation among cooperatives, which basically means that co-ops can work together and give each other advice and support and help set up. And yeah, that just means that there's always a really supportive network of co-ops in the country. There's 7,000 co-ops in the UK, and the number of housing co-ops is a bit lower. In Brighton, at least, there's about 20 housing co-ops, varying in size between kind of 5 members to 500 members. Okay, next slide, please. So yeah, what is a co-op? There's a lot of different kinds of co-ops, and today obviously we're talking about housing co-ops, but just to address it, in the top right corner, there's a symbol that maybe some of you will recognise. The cooperative supermarket is a consumer co-op, so that's a bit different from a workers co-op in that it is owned by all of its members who are the consumers. So that means potentially millions of people. Anyone who, when you're at the till of the co-op, you say, they ask you if you want a membership card, you say, yeah, pay £1. You become a member and you get to help shape the direction. In general, though, consumer co-ops are a lot bigger and less democratically controlled, just because of the sheer scale of them. So some other examples of cooperatives are Infinity Foods Workers Co-op. And a workers co-op is one that is owned by their employees. So the people who work there get to make all of the decisions about how the business is run. So they get to choose what their activities are, what their hours are, how much they get paid. And everyone gets an equal say in this. You get to come to meetings and people still have different jobs to do, but everyone gets an input into how things are run. And study after study have shown that people who work there tend to have better well-being. What's it called? A lot fewer of them go bankrupt in the first year compared to other kinds of organizations. They generally survive better and can choose what to do with their surpluses. So Infinity Foods provides whole food, organic, vegan food in Brighton, and they deliver around the country. PESCO stands for Brighton and Hove Energy Services Cooperative. So they help you figure out about your energy needs in your house. And we are working with them in SeaSalt to think about how we can retrofit our property, for example. They also help you set up solar panels and what is it? Oh yeah, they build they put solar panels together on schools and other organisations, and it's owned by its members. And then there's another food cooperative too. So there's lots of different kinds of co-ops. We're talking about housing co-ops. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so as Tim said, described co-ops essentially, they're owned by the members. So the members might be the consumers or the workers. In the housing co-op's case, it's the tenants. The tenants might be referred to as members or residents. And essentially a housing co-op is a group of people who have control over their own housing, but they don't own it personally. So members of the cooperative don't own that house. They're not personally liable to anything going wrong with the housing co-op entity. So it's a legal structure that kind of, you can think of the housing co-op as it's a separate person that owns the property and takes out the mortgage and takes in the rent from the tenants, but the tenants themselves, who are the members, decide what goes on. So what happens in the house, whether that be, say, decorating, maintenance, surplus. As Sim said, members of co-ops can decide where the surplus goes. So it might be in a housing co-op, they decide, okay, we're paying this rent, we've paid most of the mortgage, we could either reduce our rent, or we could buy another property, or we could support another co-op. So yeah, there's lots of flexibility and autonomy in what the members and the residents of a housing co-op can do. Can we go on to the next slide, please, Kirsty? And as I said, people don't personally own it, so they're not personally liable to anything. So this would mean, for example, if the housing co-op, if we're thinking of it as a separate entity, a separate person, if it wasn't making enough money, or if rent wasn't covering the property, or say something drastic happened to it, the people who are living there, who are the members of the housing co-op, wouldn't be liable to pay anything. And usually membership, so to become a member of a co-op is often about £1. So in SeaSalt, we've all paid £1 to become a member, which means when we do have a house, the people who live there, if something went wrong, the £1 is the only thing that you personally lose. Not that things go wrong in housing co-ops loads. I feel like I've said about that too much, but often at freshers fairs and things, people would say like, well, what would happen if, if you don't pay the mortgage? And I think as a point of reassurance, actually the housing co-op is kind of separate to you personally. And yeah, you can just have so much more autonomy because you essentially own it and can decide what goes on. And if we could have oh wait, I forgot, sorry, can you go back please? This was the arrows were supposed to show it's the people who live there at that time who make the decisions. So you might have new members coming in who move into the house, they become a member of the housing co-op, and then they might move out, and they're old members. But it's those who are kind of, I like to think of it as under the roof of the housing co-op, who are the ones that make the decisions and make up what the housing co-op is at that time. So people kind of come and go. And yeah, if we go on to the next slide. Basically, a student housing co-op is a housing co-op made up of students or recent graduates. So as we've been saying, that members of co-ops get to kind of choose what happens. Most student housing co-ops can choose the kind of exact rules around who can become a member and when people have to kind of stop being a member. So for SeaSalt, we've said whilst you're a student plus 1 year after graduation, which is why me and Sim are still hanging on after graduating, because under our rules that's what we thought was best for kind of the continuation of the co-op. And if we go on to the no, we've got members of SeaSalt who aren't UK citizens. We've got people from quite a few countries who have been involved over the years, and it doesn't matter, it's just the housing. I don't think as a co-op, I don't think we've got any rules around where people are from at all. That doesn't really come into the picture. Obviously, in terms of yeah, Sim, do you have anything to add on that? I think basically my answer is no, it makes no difference.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. We don't have any rules about what people's citizenship status would be. No, if you want to become a member and you meet the membership criteria, which in this case is you're a student or you were a student in the last year, and you're based in Kent. Technically, even if you were like going to the Open University but lived in Kent, that would still meet the criteria. Basically, you're in higher education and you're living in the area. That is it. Does citizenship affect the ability to set one up though? I don't see why not, as long as you're legally like able to become a director of an organisation. So all members of a housing co-op, this probably comes to the next point, all members of a housing co-op are technically directors of this organisation. And it helps to think about that because so directors kind of all have an equal say, unpaid, but they all get an equal say into how the organisation is run and how decisions get made. So I would say no. Ruthie, would you add anything?
No, I think the main things when we signed, when we registered as a cooperative, so when we set one up, we registered the address of our University Students' Union. So Sussex Students' Union is where our cooperative is registered. It's not personally our addresses or anything, and then we just put our names down because we had to have like a named chair and named secretary. So as far as I know, citizenship has never been an aspect or a barrier to starting a cooperative. Also, just to add on that, we have sorry, Simi, we think in a way housing co-ops are a more inclusive way of housing students, because for example, definitely at SeaSalt and the existing student housing co-ops, they don't ask for huge deposits and would never ask international students to cough up rent up front, which isn't uncommon in the private sector. So we think about ways that, you know, housing co-ops are open to everyone. And I'd say there are quite a few decisions that can be made when you set up a housing co-op to make sure that everyone's included and that actually it works better than what's currently on offer.
Yeah. Oh, we'll get to that. We'll get there. And I want to go into the next thing, but I just also want to say every co-op's culture is different, and I think that's the point of it. Like, you're a group of 5, 10, 15 people who are shaping what the co-op is going to look like for years to come. but it would be the case that there is an element in all student housing co-ops and all housing co-ops that you're addressing housing need, and that when rooms are being allocated, there is an element of counting people who are in higher housing need. And in my opinion, if your citizenship status isn't quite as clear cut as British, then that would be the case. Okay, I'm going to move on and answer some of the questions in the chat. How do housing co-ops work? So it's helpful to kind of compare it to a shared house, right? You've got a bunch of people living together and everyone's got an opinion. So I live in a housing co-op, and we have monthly general meetings and monthly house meetings. Most decisions get made, almost all decisions get made at these general meetings. And so, for example, my housing co-op has some loan stock to pay back, which is a slightly complicated form of loans that co-ops take on, generally for 5 years at a time. So when we were doing that, we had to figure out how we were going to basically, for the last year, we've been thinking about how much money we're having to put aside every month from rent to go to pay that loan stock off, and that's the kind of thing that would get discussed at a general meeting. Similarly, if we needed to retrofit the house, which we're talking about right now, how would we make decisions about what gets prioritised over other things? All of those things get decided at houses. And so generally tenants vote, every member gets a single vote, but we often do things called consensus decision making. And so we try not to, get more than 50% of people to vote. Yeah, and as soon as we make decisions, as soon as everyone in the co-op is happy, all of the members are happy with moving forward with something, we can do that. And we've got the rental income to make that happen. We're not waiting around for landlords to get back to us and tell us whether that's okay or not, or buy something that's going to break in a year's time. Yeah, anything to add? Okay, next slide, please. Okay, there's a question here about how to run the house, i.e. deposits, tenancy and rent if you don't own the property. So there's two things here. There is student housing co-op specifically I'm talking about here. There is a wider body that owns the house, okay? And for example, for SeaSalt, this is going to be the Brighton Hove Community Land Trust. Get into that later. They have a 7-year lease with the Student Housing Co-op. Okay, Student Housing Co-op is an organisation, and even though all of us are directors, it is the co-op that has the lease. From there, every individual, like myself, would have a tenancy with the co-op. So even though I have a tenancy, even though I'm renting from the co-op, I'm one of the people in the co-op who makes the decisions. And hopefully that explains some things. It doesn't bring up loads more questions. But keep listening and yeah, we'll go into it.
Yeah, we've got a slide on financing in a bit, so hopefully that'll answer any questions. But as Sim's kind of said, the main premise of a housing co-op and the decision making is that people can make the decisions, and it is shown to be a successful way of living that's in terms of resident satisfaction, and that's according to a big document, that's not the word, big piece of research that was carried out, yeah, by Co-ops UK. And I think, Sim, you've kind of talked about how that autonomy can look in terms of repairs and upgrades and where the money goes. So if we could go on to the next slide. So just to show that it does work, the model works. There's housing co-ops all over the world, and less in the UK than other countries, especially looking at other European countries. In the UK, there's 243 housing co-ops, 4 of those and counting are student housing co-ops that have a house. And what I mean by that is that they're groups of students who have set up a housing co-op and have a property. So as you'll find out later, SeaSalt are on the brink of getting a property. Then Edinburgh, Nottingham, Sheffield and Birmingham have a property already. And then there's a real mix that's down to groups of students, say in Bristol, who set up just at the end of last year, who are setting up a student housing co-op. So yeah, these are just a few examples of I suppose ones that have inspired me, I think, along the way of finding out about housing co-ops. We've had an event with a co-op in Uruguay, and Uruguay has lots of housing co-op friendly laws. And yeah, Kenya, Geneva in Switzerland, there's a big student housing co-op that Sim's actually been to. And we often look over towards the North American Students of Cooperation, which represents 4,000 students across North America. So they've got a really well-established model of student housing co-ops and using this model of accommodation to house students. So yeah, that's just some case studies. If we could have the next slide, please. So we're getting on to the financing part. And I suppose before Sim kind of goes into that in a bit more detail, I just wanted to say how it does differ to the private rental market. So usually in a private rented house, we pay rent, it goes to a landlord, or it might go through an agency or property management company to a landlord or a shareholder. So the premise of this is that it makes profit somewhere along the lines. I know there are some exceptions, but on the whole, it's for profit. So these properties are seen sort of as investments that you get money back through rent. And so the question marks are for maintenance, repairs, if you're allowed to decorate, if your home's good quality, replacement of furniture. So quite a few of the things that people had kind of put in the chat at the start of the event when you think of student housing. I think it varies so much. There's very little certainty in what quality housing you get or what you get, and kind of what the living standards are. If we could have the next slide. I'm just going to pick out 2 of these that came out of the National Student Accommodation Survey in 2019, around some of those issues that again were put in the chat, and I've put as question marks around whether the landlord or agency would do it. So 90% of students experience issues with their housing, mostly because of maintenance or the standard of it, and 50% of students struggle to pay rent. So yeah, I think we kind of have the idea by now that student housing isn't perfect, but there are alternative models. If we can go on to the next slide, and I'll hand back to Sim.
Yeah, so this is just to touch on kind of the wider housing market and why actually we can't afford a home. So this slide is named after a book by an academic called Josh Ryan Collins, who talks a lot about residential capitalism and what the feedback cycle is between the financial market and house prices. I can't go into it as much as I want to, but there is a blog post which I'll link here, which talks about why house and rent prices have increased so much in the past 2 decades in relation to people's incomes. We can see here on the graph, this is the ratio between people's incomes on an annual basis versus the average house prices that people are paying for. And clearly since 2000 or so, they've gone up exponentially. It doesn't need to be this way, but the current set of our capitalist economy is highly reliant on housing as a financialized model, as an investment that landlords can make money from. And as with anything, once you've got some money, it's easier to make some more money because you can put that in a house and invest it. And what we're seeing is, well, housing is for housing's sake, it's not for investment's sake. And so it's, yeah, I guess it's just a different approach, and all the money that comes in from rent goes back into the house, paying off the mortgage, paying for maintenance, insurance, all of that fun stuff. Okay, so I think we're gonna oh wait, there's one more slide that I'm gonna get to before we're gonna have a short break, I believe. And next slide, please. Yeah, so how do housing co-ops work financially? Okay, so in essence, like I said, every individual, like myself, is renting from the co-op first and foremost. That's one relationship. So I pay rent in the same way as I would usually. Every month, I have a direct debit and I pay rent to the housing co-op. The difference is the housing co-op can then choose what to do with that money after, of course, it has put money aside for the mortgage and other main costs. So in the top left here, we've got mortgage payments directly by the co-op or through a leaser. In the housing co-op that I live at the moment, we have a mortgage, the co-op has the mortgage. So I'm treasurer, so I deal with finances through that. But in a student housing co-op, this would be through an intermediary organisation. And they would hold the mortgage and be dealing with the bank. And part of that is, I guess, for safeguarding students year on year come in and go out, and if there was 1 year where students didn't know how to, this just means that there is another organisation in place who would be paying this. Do rents rise with inflation? With CPI, yeah, in line with the consumer price index. I don't know what that is right now. It's probably about 0.5%, and we've got rent reviews on an annual basis. So money also gets spent on maintenance. Maintenance costs, like me, so many things, but painting a wall, for example. In the background, my house bell has just gone off, which maybe you can hear. This is embarrassing, but also quite fun. This is my dinner bell. Every day around this time, someone in my house is cooking dinner, and I should have told them to shut up today. But it just means that we all eat together, and one person cooks for 10 or 12 people, and we sit down for dinner together, which is quite nice. Then, yeah, people put money aside for bills, and any surpluses get held in a shared project fund by the student housing co-op and the intermediary organisation, and together they can decide what gets done with this spare money, and if there's any left over, if there weren't as much maintenance costs as was predicted, then you can spend on something else. Okay, I'm rambling. Let's get to the video, and then actually maybe I think we're doing a bit early on time, so no, you know what, I think we're gonna watch a video. And then people can go away for a break, a bio break. I learned that word yesterday. And come back in 10 minutes, and we'll chat a bit more about SeaSalt and take questions. All right, cool.
Yeah, if you have any kind of pressing questions that you really want to cover before, I mean, after the video, before we go on, I'm going to be sitting around during the break. So I think having a break is great. If you want to go off, that's fine. But if you've kind of sat there with a burning question, please feel free to shoot it our way. But yeah, so this video, just for Kirsty kindly plays it for us, was made by Student Co-op Homes, which is the national body for student housing cooperatives. And they're looking at expanding, and what they'll be doing is buying properties that they own. So as an organisation, they'll be the ones that have their name to it, but as Sim's explained, they'll then be leasing it on a long-term basis to groups of students who are setting up housing co-ops, so that they can run it in their way. Yeah, so we are going to get onto that later, but I just want to give a bit of context to the people behind this video. We hope you enjoy it.
It's a trope in our society that student housing is rubbish. It's just a thing we all say and all recognise, and it's kind of, actually, does it have to be that way? Students are poor consumers of housing. They're not around long enough to affect any actual changes in the markets, and landlords are just ripping us all off.
At the end of the day, you're living in somebody else's properties that they just own so as to make money from you.
They just set their prices so high and there's no alternative, or at least people don't think there is any alternative.
Student Housing Co-op is a student house that's owned by its students, it's self-managed.
We're democratically run by our members, and in doing so we provide better quality housing, and we're also able to bring costs right down to offer cheaper housing than the alternatives.
Not only is it like cheaper, but the money you're paying is going to the actual upkeep of the house, like all of it, which just leads to like a much higher quality of accommodation.
There is no landlord, we are the landlords. We're in charge.
If we wanted to paint something or make a mural, we can do it. We want to drill into the wall to put a picture up, we can do it. We want to put a satellite up, we can do it. We don't have to ask anyone.
It was just an empty, wet space without anything there. We took the flooring out and then we had to put on new walls and new floors and new waterproofing, and now there's a shower in it.
This was a garage 2 years ago.
This one we're in right now, we're in the process of now renovating into that more appropriate usable space.
Just got such a spread of very interesting people doing very interesting things.
It's like a whole world in one building. It's very like spontaneous in the way that sometimes someone's making food and then like here 5 people walk past your window and then you invite them in and then you have a big dinner together.
There's a really nice sense of community. There's lots of nice people who live here.
It definitely changes the way you go about how you relate to people, what your ambitions are in life. It's hugely formative, and I think it is for a lot of people who live here.
And I've just met so many amazing people and just bounced off so many ideas. I think it's just really enabled me to grow as a person and to think about how we can apply this to other areas of our life as well.
We can actually take on the landlords and the problem system that we're living under.
Well, we hope you enjoyed the video. I find that one quite a motivating one. So we're going to have a 5-minute break. So if we come back at 7:05, and as I said, in the meantime, if you do want to stick around, you're welcome to, but go off and get some water or food or yeah, whatever you fancy, and we'll see you in a bit. When we come back, we'll be talking about SeaSalt, how to set up a co-op, and also about Kent Community Housing Hub. Hi, I've just seen the chat. Yeah, this is being recorded, and I'll double check with Kent Community Hub about how to get that out. But I'll be sending any relevant links, and we can be in touch with any other information. But I'm glad you find it interesting so far. Yeah, so it'll be on the YouTube channel in a couple of months, and I'll add your email to make sure that you get a Survey Monkey, which will be a way. It's just kind of a quick survey to make sure that the Kent Hub have your details and can keep you in the loop, and that you can keep in the loop with them. So thank you for joining, though, and yeah, hopefully be in touch. Limited spaces and high demand. Yeah, basically it completely depends on. Oh, my video's off. That isn't so personal. Feel free to put yourself off mute if you want to just chat. I think a few people have gone off, so otherwise I'll just keep talking. So yeah, that it completely depends on co-op to co-op. So that's something that we looked at SeaSalt whilst we were setting up, and we're still looking at now. So yeah, in our case, we expect when we do have a property that there'll be more people interested in living in it and more applications than the rooms we have available. So we've got an application and allocation policy and process which looks at housing need, but also kind of whether students are applying because they want to be part of a co-op, or if it's just about rent, because it is also, as much as it is about having affordable housing, if you have got a high demand, it is also about people who are willing to put in a few hours a month to make sure that the organisation keeps running, because there is with the freedom of running a co-op there is some responsibilities. So yeah, to give a short answer, it completely depends how co-ops decide to deal with allocation processes. I hope that answers your question.
We get started again.
Yes. Hopefully people are back, but we've got another little video. No, we haven't. That's me not looking properly. Yes, this is the weird thing with Zoom, is that you don't actually know if people are back. So we're going to assume you are all still with us listening and want to hear about setting up a student housing co-op.
Yay.
Thanks, guys.
You're really being nice to us. Cool. All right. So just going to talk a little bit about why would you want to set up a student housing co-op, in case some of the reasons we haven't talked about enough yet. And there's lots of different reasons that cover lots of different issues that people can have with student housing co-ops. But I'd say my personal experience is that for me, graduating was quite a transitional period. I, didn't want to move back in with family and kind of wasn't really sure what I was doing with myself. And for me to have that stability straight after I had graduated for that 1 year meant that I could get back on my feet and I could be applying for jobs and have a safe, supportive community around me. So yeah, for me, that was a big reason to move into a housing co-op. Some other examples are you can stay for longer. Your tenancy isn't just for 10 months. You can choose to have it for longer, for 1 to 3 years, or basically you can stay as a member for as many years as your student life is. Some other things are you can decorate your own property. There's a paint roller over here. You can decorate, you can swap in your own furniture, you can move things around, you can I don't know what that light bulb was meant to be. That could either be it helps me get other ideas.
That was my slightly abstract thinking. It was the only thing that came up on the classic site Canva when I typed in skills that I felt was slightly relevant. So it was about that there's you can learn skills whilst you're part of either setting up or living in a student housing co-op or housing co-op in general. So I guess one skill that I've got since being part of SeaSalt is writing policies. So a lot of these things Sim's mentioned are down to what you decide goes in a policy. And yeah, we've been part of shaping that process and learning the skills to do it.
Yeah. Personally, in the last year, I've learned so much about house maintenance, stuff that I had no idea when I was just renting, because it's someone else's problem. But now I've helped even create this massive maintenance spreadsheet of the house, things like damp in the walls, to how do you fix the windows, make insulation better. Yeah, just things that otherwise you would completely ignore, but now I understand the ins and outs of, which is wonderful. Some other things that you can keep pets, because pets are good for well-being, and why wouldn't you? I live with 2 wonderful dogs, and as long as no one in the house has an allergy, that comes first. There is no reason why your house cannot have pets, and that can't be on your tenancy. And you can do gardening. Yeah, you can dig up the garden if you want to. We definitely have plans of growing food, and yeah, just all of the autonomy basically to do what you want to with your space. And it doesn't have to just be plain white walls and the same furniture when you move out, as long as it's in a good state. You saw the video. Students do such creative things with their rooms when given the opportunity. Okay, next slide please. Oh, we got a cute video.
Yes, yeah, Sim I think just kind of summed it all up about why set one up and why we decided to set one up. And basically it does all come down to kind of ownership and members' decisions, that you can choose to do things, and also that the house is going to be there for students. That's one, I think, like Sim said about furniture, for me, the fact that that is, you know, a home that's for students or for young people, or whoever you set it up, means that the transitions between moving in and out kind of limit things. So yes, moving on to why we set up SeaSalt. I am denied about sharing this video because I'm going to admit now it's quite cringy. And I made it with my housemate. It was part of this community housing video competition. And yeah, so basically this is a quick video to summarise about the housing situation in Brighton and why we set up SeaSalt. And yeah, we'll go into it in a bit more detail afterwards. So hope you enjoy. Kirsty, let's see. Community-led housing, a student story. Welcome to Brighton, a city with over 35,000 students and an expensive rental market rivaling London. Student life here is great, but the housing situation can leave you feeling poor, homesick, and nothing more than a pile of pound signs for the owners of the property you rent. This story usually starts in halls, which luckily are being rebuilt to include all the essentials such as en-suites and cinemas. The story usually continues to the private rental market, where some landlords and agents are known not to take student renters seriously. We tend to move on every year, which sometimes makes us vulnerable. Battling for deposits to be repaid, dealing with unresponsive landlords and unattended maintenance issues are all common activities for the Brighton student. But students across Brighton are working towards an alternative. A group of students set up SeaSalt Housing Cooperative in 2018 and are working towards being the next student housing co-op in the UK. Our vision is of a student-led initiative for affordable housing, democratic living and long-term sustainability. A housing cooperative run by and for the student community. The chance to live somewhere for up to 4 years, decorate rooms and fix maintenance issues. The student housing market story does not end here. There is a happier ending. SeaSalt Housing Cooperative, making waves in the student housing market. To find out more, visit seasalthousingcooperative.com or visit our social media. Okay, so that is, yeah, an overview, but in a bit more detail, we've got a few other reasons why SeaSalt was set up, but also over the process of the last 3 years, kind of what it's become to be. So as Sim had said, we look at we're looking quite a lot at kind of the carbon emissions that houses generate sounds too positive, but yeah, so the role of housing in the climate and looking at how we can make a more energy efficient home, so working with different organizations to kind of the idea of like how to limit the emissions that your housing puts out. So one of our key things that fits into our vision, which is a vision of a student-led initiative for affordable housing, democratic living and long-term sustainability. So how can we make it genuinely affordable and sustainable in terms of the environment, but also keeping it as a housing co-op that survives and lasts a long time, so financially sustainable. Yeah, lots of different things kind of come into that. We are for now the first housing co-op in the southeast of the UK, of England, and we were hoping to be the 4th in the UK. Not that it's a competition, but when we set up there were only 3 existing ones, and now there's 4. So Nottingham have now got a property. Glasgow will be getting one soon, it looks like. So basically the movement has grown quite a bit over the last 3 years and is still growing. And with that, there's kind of a lot of research and studies that goes on that we've participated in, and we work with a local community land trust, which we get onto a bit later in the presentation, because that's a way that for us seemed sustainable and affordable to own a property and run it as a housing co-op. but we are run by students and for students, and even when we work with other organisations, that is at the forefront of kind of what we're trying to do. And as I said, we're on, haven't yet got a house, but if we go on to the next slide, Sim's now going to take us through how SeaSalt's changed and the timeline.
Yeah. Just to add though, we by no means want to be the only student housing co-op in the southeast, and as many as possible in as many university towns as there are would be amazing. Yeah, you don't have to call yourself SeaSalt. You can call yourself whatever you want to. Okay, so yeah, SeaSalt set up 3 years ago. This month, I think it was February 2018. That's a pretty picture of us in the top left. Having a meeting. That's the meeting where I think we came up with our name. So that one was kind of beginning of 2018. One in the middle would have been 2019. We again middle year and a half after we set up. Nearly all new members. We looked very different, and I think this photo was after we had just been successful in getting some grants. So this was the pretty picture that we had to take for the press release. The grants helped us form as an organisation, give our members training, pay for visits to other student housing co-ops, and things like paying for your insurance that you never remember you're going to have to do. So yeah, we got some grants. Picture in the bottom right is last summer. We had a period over the beginning of lockdown where we got fewer and fewer members because priorities had shifted. And then over the summer, we got a bunch of wonderful new faces joining us, and these are the new group. And I think the reason I show you the slide is because student housing co-ops by their very nature change a lot over time. They're very transitory. You know, students grow up and they graduate and they leave. But that doesn't mean that we're not still a really strong group, and that every single one of these people in these photos have had an influence in shaping the future of SeaSalt and what it's going to look like. So yeah, just to say, it's been 3 years and we're aiming to get a property this year because we've got some money to buy a property, which maybe is the next slide actually that we're going to talk about. Yeah, so here's just a bit of a timeline. Back in Feb 2018, that says Housing Co-op Info Events, and that's kind of similar to what we've got going on here today. It was just a bunch of people who seemed vaguely interested and invited a bunch of students and said, come and hear about what a student housing co-op is and maybe we could set it up. And it all came out of over the years, a couple of student union officers who kind of had it in their manifestos, like they wanted to set one up. Yeah, there was kind of some institutional support for it, and a bunch of keen beans like myself who was I think at the time procrastinating from writing my dissertation, so showed up to this event and got sucked in. Anyway, that's not going to be the case because you guys have just finished your assessments, right? August 2018, we're holding up a certificate. That is when we incorporated, so we became a legally recognised organisation. And that meant that we could open a bank account, and we registered with our primary rules. So we were kind of seen as a formal organisation at that point. We are also a student society, but we kind of have to do both. We can't just be a student society. That wouldn't give us a lot of freedom. September 2018, that is a picture of Freshers Fair, and that has happened pretty much every single September. Well, not the last one, that one was online, but you know, big recruiting drive, like tell lots of new students what student housing co-ops are, and some people are interested and join the working group, and then we meet, like I think we meet on a fortnightly basis, sometimes weekly basis, to make decisions and plan events or write down policies. so many things to do at the meetings, never enough time. Okay, and then August 2019, bed and breakfast. So around this time, we were looking for properties, and there was a B&B going that had been unoccupied for about 2 years at that point, and they were looking to sell. And we needed to get planning permission before we bought it because it operated as a bed and breakfast, and it needed to change to class C2 or some weird form of planning. And so we ran this sort of campaign around the city because it became an open planning application. It was a consultation that anyone could comment on, and it becomes open to the public for people to say whether they agree or disagree with this kind of development going ahead. And overwhelmingly, we got support. I think we got about 50 comments in the end, including some from the university, local residents, other students, other student housing co-ops. And it just became quite clear to our local city council that this was something that we really wanted to happen. Unfortunately, before we could buy it, a cash buyer, I believe, bought it, and yeah, as is always the case, big housing developers have the cash and can buy properties way quicker than groups like ourselves can. So we didn't get that, but we did have a lot of really good communication with our local city council, and just community engagement in the local area. And yeah, that was just really good for us. And in March 2020, we had a community share offer. And a community share offer is a way of raising finance, basically. And it means that people with some kind of interest in the project can buy shares in this project. And we raised over £300,000 in the last year, which is a bit mental to say that number out loud. We're going to pay all of it back, and it's going to be like our mortgage payments, some of the payments that go out. But what it does mean is that we can keep our rents at £105 a week, and we have the financial independence to go out and buy a house now. And so the share offer closed at the end of last year, 31st of December, and we've already, I say we, SeaSalt have already put in an offer, and it's been accepted on an 8-bedroom house. And I'm going into the future. Next slide, please, because this is meant to be the past. I've already kind of gone through this, but in March the pandemic hit, and we lost a lot of our members. July we got a bunch of new members. And in November last year, so Ethics was the platform on which we, it's an ethical investment, ethical finance platform, and it just means that that you can raise money on it. I don't know how to explain it, but we got support from the People's Postcode Lottery, and they match funded, I think, £35,000. Again, mental to say out loud, but I think that was the point at which we realised that we were going to meet our target and exceed it. So yeah, we closed it in December, and now here we are doing some events in the southeast, and we're looking to get a property this academic year, so by the end of 2021. Anything to add, Ruthie, or?
No, I think we'll carry on through, and then we'll have time for questions and like a chat at the end. So if you do want to kind of find out more about the investment side and the ins and outs of how we did that, hopefully at the end we can answer anything you have. But yeah, thanks, Sim. That's 3 years in a nutshell. Very well done.
It's way too much to say, never enough time. And yeah, if you ask me in another year, there'll be so much more to say also. But okay, we're going to go into an activity really quickly. And I'm just going to drop a link in here. And I basically, the question that we're asking here is, What impact would having more ownership over your home have on your life? And if everyone could please open up that poll, and it's going to be a word cloud, so words will appear like one word at a time. So basically, if you're going to say a 2-word thing, then hyphenate them and keep them together. Yeah, and I will just get my slide ready to share. Okay, Ruthie, not Ruthie, Kirsty, please can I share my screen? Okay, cool. Can everyone see the big word cloud? Thumbs up if you can. Can everyone see the word cloud?
Yeah, it's all up.
Awesome, thanks.
There's words coming in.
Whoa.
And the bigger the word is means that more than one person has put it in. So that's how you can see if there's any kind of themes coming up. And this is
just give it another minute if anyone else wants to put some words in. Yeah, I love.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was just going to say it's not like specifically about housing co-ops. Like we're not. When we came up with the activities, I remember Sim saying, "I don't want to talk about housing co-ops," and then be like, "Why do you tell me why you want to set up a housing co-op?" It's not like that. It's just thinking generally. And often in freshers' fairs, we find like people don't think there is an alternative, let alone thinking about what that alternative might look like. So that's why we often try and encourage people at these kind of events to think about what the alternative, which is having more ownership, because I think that's an identified thing of what's lacking at the moment in especially private rented housing.
Mm-hmm.
They're so pretty, these word clouds.
I love these, and also to note, so far they're all quite positive words, I think. Yeah, I wonder if anyone's thinking about the downsides. Like, there might not be. I love owning my house. It means that I get to have this massive plant in the corner of my room, and it's been there for 10, 15 years. I inherited it from people before me. They inherited it from people before them. Yeah, I couldn't do that. But what? Oh, this is all so wholesome. I can't see any of your faces mostly, but this is lovely. I would be smiling at you if I could. Okay, pause it there. And Kirsty, if you want to start sharing again, please. Cool. Cool. And yeah, these are some of the words that we came up with. But I liked your words a lot more. Okay, what are we doing next?
Can we just keep on? I forgot in the first time we showed this slide, that photo in the top left is one Tessa sent. I think it was a private rental halls, like kind of private accommodation for students that was built in Kent, in Canterbury, and someone had written affordable housing over it. So yeah, that we just felt that was very relevant to what we're talking about today. And yeah, thank you everyone for doing the word cloud. That was really nice to see everyone's ideas. Yeah,
thank you for engaging with us. Never really sure how that's going to go. That was really nice to see. Yeah, and just to come on to the rent strike picture over here. So the rent strike is one of the biggest student housing movements currently happening across the country, and you can't really separate that from the financialization of the academic sector that's going on. You know, universities are having to make their budgets like squeeze things out of their budgets because they're not getting enough funding, and that means that part of their budget comes from these private student halls. I know for a fact that at Sussex at least, students aren't wanting more en suites. They aren't wanting like really fancy student housing, but that's the only way that universities are going to get it, through charging really high fees, partnering with massive developers to give them funding. And so the rent strike movement is really great because it's saying, actually, because of COVID, so many of us haven't even been able to live in our houses. Why are we paying for this? Just to cover here that there is a systemic issue, and student housing co-ops are one of many solutions, and lots of the students involved are also involved in lots and lots of other projects to try and make student life a bit better. Okay, next slide please. Just to quickly touch on the support that we've gotten and the other events that we've been to. So there's pictures of smiling people. We visited in top left Birmingham Student Housing Co-op quite early on in our journey, and they fed us dinner and put us up. And for me at least, it was really inspiring to in the flesh see what this looked like and just chat to some of these people. In the top right, this is just one of our socials, I think. There's a cooperative pub just down the road, and so we like to go there sometimes. Bottom left, fresh as fair, always on it with the fairs, chatting to new students. And bottom right is a co-op connections event, where we just kind of chatted to other local housing and worker cooperatives in the area. We've also been supported by our local MPs, Lloyd Russell Moyle and Caroline Lucas. Lloyd Russell Moyle actually used to live in a housing cooperative for 6 years and loves to chat about them and is very supportive. So that's really nice that we've got that support. Yeah, over the years, done so many events, spoken to academics. We do a lot of community engagement, and there's no way that I can concisely cover that. Okay, next slide, please.
Okay, so I'm just going to quickly build on what Sim said, which is around where we've got support in setting up, because as we've probably hinted to, it's quite a big project, but very worthwhile, and having different people to kind of support you along the way is great. So as well as the Students' Union, who have helped us with Freshers' Fairs and providing support, for example, as I said, their address is where we're kind of registered, so there's ways that we've worked with them, and that's across both the universities in Brighton, so Sussex and the University of Brighton. So wherever if there's students in Kent here who are thinking maybe about setting one up, I'd say definitely reach out across universities and colleges. It doesn't have to just be specific to one. And yeah, there's a photo of us at Birmingham at the top right. In fact, the middle photo is also Birmingham Housing Co-op. The bottom left is when a group of SeaSalt members went to Edinburgh. That's the largest student housing co-op. I think they have 105 rooms. And the one with the digger is a tour of housing co-ops in Brighton. So we've had a lot of support and worked with housing co-ops who aren't just for students or young people, and gained a lot of experience from there. Yeah, the oldest one we visited, I think, has been there since the 60s, if I'm not wrong, Sim, and it's a lovely site that's like £50 a week. They've paid off their mortgage. Anyway, if we go on to the next slide, there's a very specific organisation that's supported us. So Brighton and Hove Community Land Trust, which we've mentioned a couple of times, is a community land trust, which as the definition there says, they're set up by ordinary people to develop and manage homes as well as other assets. CLTs act as long-term stewards of housing, ensuring it remains genuinely affordable based on what people actually earn in their area, not just for now, but for every future occupier. So essentially, it's a group of people in a community who can join, make an organisation that holds land or property as an asset for the community. So community run and for the community. And we were lucky when we were setting up that there's a very active CLT in Brighton, and they supported us with things from some grant funding, supporting us in making the registration documents and some of the paperwork at the start. We've had training with them. They helped with our community engagement, which is what Sim said about with the bed and breakfast. So when we were speaking to people about our project and looking at the planning permission changes, they kind of helped us with the spreading the word around the community, really. And there's a photo of us in a meeting. But also recently, we kind of have worked together on the premise that they will buy a property that will essentially belong to the CLT, which means in whatever form it will always be for community use and community purpose, but they're going to lease it to SeaSalt on a long-term lease. So we'll be running that property as a housing co-op. But as Sim kind of touched on earlier, we went down this route because as students kind of come and go fairly regularly, we needed like a stable organisation to manage the mortgage and paying back investors. So whilst we have a lot of freedom around it, that was a way for them to kind of work with us long term to make sure that the project was sustainable. If we go on to the next slide, another model, so whereas the CLT will own the property, lease it to us, and we'll run it as a housing co-op, there is another option which is growing. Student co-op homes I mentioned earlier are the national body. So they've bought, similar to kind of our investment, our share offer with the CLT, where we raised investment through shares, student co-op homes did the same. So they raised around £300,000 as well, which they have used to buy Nottingham a property. So Nottingham Student Housing Co-op will have a property, and also Glasgow, but long term they're looking at growing a lot. So this diagram kind of summarises how that works. So you've got the property purchase of the properties, the rent goes back to student co-op homes, as well as operational costs, shares and loan finance. The more properties you have, you can then use that in your favour to kind of get another one. So I don't want to kind of overcomplicate things, but once you've got one and then two and three, it gets easier to use them as kind of, I've completely gone blank for the word, it's not leverage, but
equity.
To get more. So student co-op homes exist as a national body of support, but also a route that student housing co-ops are increasingly going down as a way to actually get that collateral, that's the word, thank you. So I feel like I've gone in more detail than I intended. We will have time afterwards to chat and answer any questions, but from the national scale to the more local scale, I'm going to hand over to Tessa and Kirsty from Kent Community Housing Hub to say kind of what's available locally.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So actually, the Palamon Court, where it had affordable housing sprayed all over it, was removed very quickly. Got into the local paper, but I think that was more about the vandalism than the point that was trying to be made at the time. But yeah, it's quite luxury student accommodation. So this is what the hub does. This is what we do. We're a voice for community-led housing in Kent. We're part of a national network. There are hubs all over the country. Brighton CLT is kind of a hub as well, but it's kind of got that extra level of being a CLT, which we're not. So we do a number of things. In terms of how we can help student cooperatives, we can provide early stage advice on setting up groups. We could link in with SeaSalt if they're their advice, I think, if you're happy to do that, and student co-op homes. We have good working relationships with local authorities across the county, which is really useful, as you were saying, with your, when you were looking to get a planning application for the B&B. And we have technical advisors who work for the hub, and we're all trained in community-led housing, but we've got technical advisors who sort of have expertise in various parts of stages of development. So you could get advice from them, for instance, how to set up a cooperative structure, how to incorporate financial viability of a scheme. I think that you had that from a technical advisor at SeaSalt. Advice on funding, and also sort of specific training issues. If a group needs any specific training, we can provide that either ourselves or by getting somebody else in. And we're very happy to have just informal chats really with anybody who might be thinking of setting up a student co-op or any kind of co-op really. I know there's some interest in just general shared house co-ops. Yeah, so please do contact us if you just want to have a chat about it and how we might be able to help you get started. Okay, that's it.
Cool. I think that means that we can take questions. We've got a little survey if people want to fill it out. But yeah, that's the presentation. Proper speed through student housing co-ops. Yeah, if you have questions, type them in the chat, pop your video on, let's see your faces. Yeah, or even just comments. Got 15 minutes set aside for this. Yeah. If not, I can keep talking. Here's some cute Lego code. This is the house. Sometimes I make Lego.
Yeah, we've got time to kind of just chat now. So if you have questions, we kind of appreciate we've covered a lot and try to fit quite a bit in, and we often get a lot of questions kind of around the financing of it. So yeah, please feel free to ask anything.
I've seen a question. What insurance did you need to start the cooperative? Really good question. So there's kind of separate insurances that you'd need for when you're a housed co-op, when you start living in one, and that'll be content and buildings insurance. But we don't have that yet. We have a different kind of just organisational insurance, and that's the kind of things like if something was to go wrong at an event, we'd have some kind of like risk assessment in place basically. So we went with Zurich, I want to believe, Zurich Insurance, and or maybe I'm confusing that with the insurance that we have in my house. Ruthie, do you remember? Is it Zurich?
I can't remember, but yeah, there's definitely providers that can help with insurance.
Yeah, it wasn't the first thing that we were having to think about, like, because the first organisational structure that we took was more of just a student society, and student unions have their own insurance anyway, but it did become more relevant further on. Yeah. Oh, okay. Oh, thank you guys. I mean, you're very welcome.
We've got a question. How is it for student co-ops setting up if the initial members have graduated before getting a property? So And then generally, do people find it difficult to move on from the community after no longer being eligible? Should I take the first one and you answer the second one?
Sure.
So yeah, the initial members of graduate before getting a property. I mean, that is me and Sim completely. So we won't be living in the SeaSalt property. But to be honest, from my point of view, I wasn't only involved for living in it, I was also involved for the process and to be part of something kind of bigger, I suppose. And although it's disappointing I couldn't live in it, it is a long process. And yeah, I think a lot of members have been involved in the process of setting it up more for kind of the skills and the experiences and kind of know about housing co-ops more than just about living in it. Having said that, at freshers fairs we did often get people who were kind of only interested if we had a house. So I think the main thing with that is kind of managing expectations, whether that's of the group who are setting it up or when students get on board, being honest and open about kind of timelines of things. So yeah, I hope that answers your question. And also, I think people, you know, I still dip my toe in SeaSalt stuff, even though I'm graduated, and it's always going to be something that I'll be happy to help with. And I know in Birmingham, some of the co-founding, like the founding members of Birmingham Student Housing Co-op, which set up, I want to say 2014. Yeah. They still are kind of on the end of an email for people who have questions. So yeah.
I just add that I think this is the case with a lot of student activism. Like, you're doing something that's a lot bigger than yourself, and you know, you're only taking part in a working group for maybe 6 months, maybe 10 months, but this isn't just the case for student housing co-ops, it's the case for any campaign that you're running. It's going to have impacts on future students and their lives, and there's something wonderful in that. I think every single student who's been involved in SeaSalt has wanted to do something for future students, because that's what we would have wanted past students to have done for us. It's just this constant passing on. So I would say that in terms of being part of the community, up until COVID, maybe for a couple of months before COVID, we would have SeaSalt meetings at my house, which is a local housing cooperative. And there are links there. It's the same with Birmingham. The people who went on and graduated live in another housing cooperative a bit nearby. Those relationships are always going to stay, and maybe graduates aren't, you know, making the main decisions anymore, but they're still part of the community. Yeah, they still like to keep up in the gossip. But I suppose if you mean like from a housing perspective, yeah, I guess you are sort of planning your life around, you'll have to leave after you a year after you graduate, and hopefully at that point you can find another form of secure housing, even though it'd be really nice to offer affordable secure housing for everyone forever. And
I just thought of a very specific kind of tax reason why often you wouldn't have it being kind of students and open to people for years and years down the line. The students don't pay council tax, but once you graduate and start earning, you do. So whilst we have that people can live in the house after they graduate, and council tax is reduced if you live with students, it's kind of a factor for why we didn't decide that it wasn't that, you know, graduates could be part of it for like 5 years after graduating. So if kind of the balance of students and non-students in the house kind of outweighs, then it can basically the graduates can end up paying more council tax. I'm not a council tax expert, But let's move on to the other question. Did other co-ops in Brighton and Hove offer support, skills, advice, or funding? Yes, definitely a lot. I think, as much as kind of skills and advice about specific things which we got, I learned so much just by sort of informal chats and visiting them and asking questions and hearing about what it's like to live in a housing co-op. And some, I think quite a few actually generously invested when there was the share offer. So that was something that the members decided that they had surplus money or they had enough in the bank to invest, and they will get that money back after a few years. There are some risks associated, but yeah, they're kind of using their funding to support other housing co-ops in that way. Sim?
I agree with that. The whole point of cooperative housing is that as you're slowly building up equity in the houses that you own, you can release some of that equity and use that money to then get a mortgage on another property and create more affordable housing that is controlled by the tenants. So it's been really heartwarming to have all of these local housing co-ops support us through investment. There is also Chibber, cooperative housing in Brighton and Hove, who at the beginning of lockdown had a solidarity fund for any individuals within co-ops who was facing a crisis, and a lot of co-ops chipped into that pot. So that was £1,000 or maybe a couple of grand. Yeah, there's no way I can summarize all of the skills and advice that have been passed on. I've been to so many fun training events and seminars and panels, academic and non-academic, where I've just been able to speak to other people and learn more about community wealth building. And I'll try to say this in the nicest way possible, dismantling capitalism in a way that is upheld by housing investment. Yeah, so it's really interesting and lovely to talk to other people involved in housing co-ops across the city, and also other co-ops too, worker co-ops.
I'd say a couple of years ago there was a tour, I think it was Brighton and Hove CLT put on a tour of the co-ops in Brighton, which I went on, and that was really good to see, to actually see and see the co-ops and see and hear from the people living there. So yeah, that was really inspiring.
That's so nice. You might have been to my house too.
Yeah, maybe I did. I just wondered, like, seems like quite a big thing to take on as a student, if you want to take this on, and obviously you've got studies and everything else. What do you think might be the thing that may put people off doing this? I mean, is it very timed? Does it involve a lot of time?
Good question.
Yes, I think we can definitely answer that. I was just going to quickly add to about what other co-ops can offer, because I'm aware that Kent doesn't have quite the same kind of number and movement of housing co-ops that we had in Brighton. But as Sim said, like, one of the principles of co-ops is about kind of education and sharing with others. So, you can definitely, if you're based in Kent, you can definitely reach out to co-ops across the country or even the world. Like, we've spoken to people in Uruguay and North America, Geneva. So like in Geneva. So it's not just about what's happening or what's not happening in your local area. I find generally the co-op movement is very friendly and willing to help. So yeah, in terms of what might put people off or consider, it is like quite a big time commitment, especially if the group's small. So when lockdown last year, when numbers kind of really dwindled, me and Sim were doing quite a lot of work to keep it going, and there is always work to do. So I'd say it is a time commitment. But having said that, to me, the benefits do outweigh the time commitment in terms of like the job I'm in now. I don't think I would have got if I hadn't got the experience that I got from SeaSalt, because you know there's a lot of work about managing volunteers and working with volunteers, which was something that I needed for my current role. Not that I was doing SeaSalt, just I wasn't doing it for my CV at the time. It hadn't like crossed my mind really. But looking back now, I think the amount of skills I've gained that are really useful outweigh the fact that there were points when I was trying to like write my dissertation, do my paid job, and have a SeaSalt meeting. Like there are points when it's hard work, but I would say it's something that is, I guess it is something to be proud of, and it's quite a substantial thing to be part of. And I would definitely recommend anyway for students to kind of look beyond their degrees to kind of get that experience and meet people. So yeah. Other negatives, maybe Sim, do you have any drawbacks or challenges?
Yeah. Sorry, Tessa.
No, I mean, I just think it's a good way to engage. I'm a bit of a housing sort of person, nerd anyway, but so I couldn't imagine why you wouldn't really want to get involved, but I think it's a good way to get involved, find out what's happening. And you know, from student co-ops you can go into other types of housing co-ops, and you know there's a lot of people who live in housing co-ops that are individual houses, aren't there, as well? You know, there's not just shared houses. So
yeah, that's definitely a model. Would I say anything else? Well, thank you, Sarah. Any other reasons why you wouldn't want to get involved? I definitely count myself in that category. Like 3 years ago, I would not have dreamt about knowing how much I know about housing now. I don't think I could even tell you what a mortgage was. And now I read about mortgages for fun. Yeah. Maybe a downside is that it's a really complicated world out there. And at first it's going to seem like you don't understand a lot of the words that are being used. And sometimes people look at you as young people. Not all students are young people, but some are. Like you don't really know what you're talking about, or you don't have the capabilities to set something like this up. And I remember going on a interview once and just being asked, like, do you even know how to change a light bulb? How could students care for property? And I don't know, maybe there's some truth in that, but also there are so many students out there who want to get more involved and be able to have that control over their house, and learn about these things. Especially, like, I've just rented my whole life, even with my family. And yeah, there's just some things that never would have crossed my mind to learn, and now I can. So where was I going with this? Oh yeah, there's a lot of complicated terminology out there, but there's also a lot of lovely people who'd be happy to explain it to you. So maybe that's where I'm going with that answer.
Yeah, I think that's a good one actually. It is quite daunting, and like appreciate that maybe some of the things we talked about didn't fully explain it. Like I didn't know what a housing co-op was when I first got involved. Yeah, I didn't really know about mortgages, and it's a big learning curve. But I think if you're interested, then that outweighs the fact that it's learning, and there are people who will help. But we still have moments, like sometimes with meetings with the Community Land Trust, where something will come up and we're like, we're not quite sure what that means. But you know, you aren't expected to know absolutely everything, because it's a process of building something up literally from scratch. So
yeah, I'd agree with that. And that is 8 o'clock. That's our time.
Yeah, and thanks so much. That was absolutely brilliant, really interesting. I think hopefully everybody's learned a lot about student housing co-ops. And just to sort of repeat that, if anybody is interested in sort of looking at this further or any other type of community-led housing, then please do get in touch with us and we'll just be happy to have a conversation. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add, otherwise we're finished.
Just that, as I've mentioned in the chat, I'll be sending out the links that we've put in this chat today now. So also we'll be sending a survey that was made by Kent Community Housing Hub, so that's a way to make sure that you can keep in touch and kind of give your details for maybe future support or events, and kind of take this further. So please look out for that email, and also we'll be sending a recording round at some point. Emails and where, sorry, I just spotted something. Yes, we'll be putting the email address of the Housing Hub in the email that will go out to all Eventbrite attendees of this event. Tessa, I'm sure, can say the best way of contacting, but there is also your mailing list that we'll be sending out, won't we? So there we go. Yeah, there's quite a few ways that you can keep in touch, and definitely if you're interested, please do. Yeah.
And what should students do if they are a student in Kent who wants to set up a housing co-op? Is that the best thing to do, is to get onto the mailing list, or just so we're making it really clear?
Sorry, were you talking to me then?
Oh, I don't know, this is sort of an open question. What happens next?
Yeah, it's to get in touch with us, and you have to just talk about it and take things from there, really. Just generally talk about your ideas to start with, what you'd like to do, and we can take it from there. But yeah, I think there will be something coming round with all contact details, how to get in touch with us, and yeah, we're always available for a chat, and yeah, just take it from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for inviting us. This has been lovely. Yeah, it's been really lovely to get to know you and talk about things in Kent, because now I feel like I have a slightly new skill set. And it was really nice to see people's faces, even briefly.
Sorry, I think one of the things we were going to do actually was whether there was any further training from this event, whether there was anything else, that any more specifics from what you've been talking about today that people might want to know about, but that will all be in the things that come out after. Thanks.
Yeah, well, thank you everyone for coming. Hope you've enjoyed it and have a good Pancake Day evening.